Welcome to System Catalyst.
The podcast that cracks the code for making the world a better place.
I'm Jeff Walker.
And I'm English Saul.
For our final episode of Season 2, we've got a very, very special guest. Our fellow host from Season 1 and dear friend, Tulaine Montgomery.
For those who don't know, Tulaine is a serial entrepreneur, writer, educator, activist, and the CEO of the venture philanthropy organization, New Profit. She helped start this show and now has her very own podcast, Say More with Tulaine Montgomery.
We decided to have Tulaine on because in a lot of ways, she's a system catalyst for system catalysts. Throughout her career, she has supported many changemakers and is pioneering a new era of philanthropy.
In this conversation, Tulaine tells us about some of the concerns she's been hearing from system catalysts lately. She also talks about New Profit's new approach to collaboration called MIKE, which is building cross-sector, multiracial, and intergenerational coalitions. If you're a changemaker, chances are that you've been thinking about some of these same issues. So we think you're going to get a lot from this episode.
Hey, Tulaine.
Hello.
We're happy to see you.
Good to be seen. Good to see you.
English is here.
Hello.
Tulaine's here. We have the gang back together.
The gang is back together. Yes.
We've had a lot of really good interviews on systems change and system catalysts and hearing from people who are trying to be those collaborative glue that kind of brings together the change we want to see. You know, you guys have been focusing on education, workforce, democracy, and using the mic as an overlay on it, but also system change models for a long time. You guys have been cutting edge, and I consider you a catalyst of catalysts. And so how do you kind of look at who do you support?
Yeah.
How are you finding these system catalysts who are coming to you or you're going to them to try to help implement these kind of collaboratives?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say it's a combination of both, right? Where they're coming to us and we're finding them and everything in between. Because as you know, English and Jeff, you both know, we don't currently have the perfect systems and methods of making sure that resources are available, to systems change leaders, across the board. It's still challenging, right? If you're a system catalyst, it's still challenging to find your folks, and also it's challenging to find the resources that you need to do the work needs to be done. So at New Profit, it's just worth saying, we're a venture philanthropy. We've been around for now 26 years. We've been for those 26 years in the business of backing high impact social entrepreneurs who are committed to advancing opportunity in America. We really work to build a bridge between the resources and the solutions. And we care deeply about capital, capacity, and community. Like those 3 C's have always been important to us. So when we think about what it means to focus on these systems change leaders, it means that we're focusing on how do we help them get access to the unrestricted capital that they need to make the decisions and build the infrastructure to deliver on these really audacious and important complex goals. So we're always in the business of finding great capacity providers and connecting them to systems change leaders. And then finally, the community, that 3rd C. For us, and we've learned this over the years, Jeff. I think when New Profit started 26 years ago, we were clear that capital and capacity mattered. We've come to appreciate how essential community is as well. And so doing events like the Well that I mentioned, but also having, really intentional focus on relationship building. So, if we think about some of the system catalysts who are in our portfolio and world, we think about folks who you guys know well, like Girl Trek, right? We connected with Girl Trek before they hit their 1 million women walking goal. We connected to them earlier on in their tenure because they were still figuring out a set of things around capital and capacity, right? And so we had the privilege of watching them grow, seeing their impact just expand, and through them, frankly, learning so much about how investing in proximate leaders is not charitable. It's not even really a DEI play, though it does generate more diverse communities, right? It's really about impact, So I would say that, through finding leaders and not finding them, right? We're not discovering anyone, but by building relationships and credibility in a range of communities where we can be trusted as a partner, we have been able to expand, the pipeline of leaders and organizations that we're familiar with and have relationship with. So we do that proactive outreach constantly, where we see ourselves in many ways as having an organizer capability because we have to be in the business of building relationships.
If you haven't listened to our episode with Girl Trek, you're missing out. It's an incredible story of two women who used the power of community to start a health revolution. There's a link to it in the show notes, so you can check it out after this one.
So, Tulaine, how has that training and that listening played out when it comes to system catalysts and different entities and different social entrepreneurs of different backgrounds? How does that look in the day-to-day? What have you found as like some of these unique needs that maybe different system catalysts need?
Back in October of 2023, at New Profit, we were noticing across our portfolio, and certainly with our system catalyst leaders who we partner with, right, that there was a whole new work stream that many of them were having to navigate that they never anticipated, which is dealing with oppositional forces, right? So if you came into this work because you wanted to do your part to build high impact, accessible, transformative learning systems, you're creating a school network and you're committed to building that infrastructure and identifying those educators and communicating with those parents. And suddenly you find that in addition to doing all of that, you now need to come up with ways to protect yourself, your data, your leadership team from the harassment campaign, right? That there is now this whole new dimension, certainly in the US, there's a whole new dimension that many system catalyst leaders, not all, but many didn't necessarily anticipate. Like the work was building the solution, scaling the solution, raising the resources, finding the talent. And now the work is all of those things plus navigating a hostile context. And that is particularly true for system catalyst leaders who are leaders of color, who are leaders from parts of our country that are historically and typically underinvested in, like rural environments, the American South, right? That depending on geography and identity, that the likelihood that you or your organization would be targeted goes up, right? So a lot of folks were, I don't want to say surprised, I don't know if that's fair, but they certainly hadn't built infrastructure, protocols, tools, mechanisms, funding pools that would allow them to easily navigate a hostile environment, right? So we noticed this. We noticed increasingly that when we were doing one-on-one coaching sessions with the entrepreneurs we invest in, we were seeing this trend, this theme, this pattern. So one of the things that we did is we said, well, we New Profit, we have to understand this. As a funding entity, our exposure to the realities of it is going to be limited because of the power dynamics and the ways that capital flows, right? And so we spent some time becoming students of this landscape. We talked with entrepreneurs. We had entrepreneurs share their story with our board. We talked with fellow funders. And we were able to hear from that perspective what's actually happening. Because part of what we're noticing is that the context has shifted, but philanthropy has not, right? So it's still almost kind of difficult or embarrassing and even shameful to say, hey, I've been targeted and I need help figuring out how to do a crisis communications plan. It's almost like, well, if you say that, are you saying you did something wrong? Because philanthropy in the US hasn't quite kind of come to terms with the volatility that's been introduced into the social impact space, right? We're still sort of acting like it's just about getting a good idea out there, scaling it smartly. And if you do it and build it, all will be well. So we talked with funders about that with our board. So our board could understand that and help us, New Profit, be more available to support these leaders.
In our conversations, and this is with Ai-Jing Pu and Jacqueline Novogratz and others, and they all talked about it's kind of depressing.
Yeah.
It's a high anxiety. There's a lot of problems out there, and it's hard to keep yourself going. How do you do it yourself? And how do you advise your team to kind of keep that going and infuse that into the fellows and others that are out there? Because it is as hard as I have ever seen it. I don't know about you.
So one is having some shared language to describe and narrate what we're going through. And, I will say, as somebody who has always been really laser focused on how do we move dollars and resources to leaders and communities, and I'm still focused on that, I've come to also appreciate that at the same time, we have to pay attention to the aspects of systems, the implicit conditions of a system, the beliefs, the relationships, the power dynamics. I've come to truly appreciate, especially at a time like this, how we do ourselves a disservice if we treat those aspects of a system as soft or unimportant or optional, right? So all to say, I spend time and try to help folks I work with, and I've tried to, at New Prophet, help my team and our board just have language to narrate what we're dealing with right now. It's a polycrisis. We're dealing with, crisis around climate. We're dealing with shifting demographics, which I don't want to label a crisis, but some people perceive it as one because we're not, as a society, prepared to leverage the beauty and power of it. We have a crisis around understanding the future of work, right? And it's happening really fast. And few of us even know what that means, right? So there's just so much. And I didn't name everything. Those are just some of the ones I named quickly. The other thing is, I don't know, maybe it hasn't been worse than this in my lifetime, maybe, but it has certainly been worse than this. It has certainly been worse than this. And the not too distant history, it has been far worse than this, right? And so in some ways, part of what I talk about and think about is, well, we had some really big victories moving towards the promise of America. And perhaps we, the collective we, thought that once you met a goal, you were good. I think we are now coming to really appreciate that any victories you have towards inclusion must be sustained. And the sustaining work is at least as difficult as the achieving work. I'll tell you, the system catalysts, they know it. It's really more of the philanthropists and the investors and the capital providers who need that reminder. The system catalysts, they know. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen this when you've talked with them, right? Like most of them are students of history in some way, whether they label themselves as such or not. They have a recognition, because they do systems analysis. They kind of know that. So I find, honestly, that the communication to the systems catalysts themselves is to remember to take care of yourself. Remember that you can have joy and fight for justice in the same life, in the same body. Remember that if you take a minute to heal your body, to enjoy your relationships, to savor your food, to get a good night's sleep, that you are not failing the movement, that you are not letting your ancestors down, that you are not failing to, step up to the mic and do what needs to be done. Remember that your joy and your longevity are as important as your justice work. So the message, honestly, to Systems Catalyst is more, you do not have to sacrifice your joy or your body for the justice movement. Now, our ancestors did, right? And I say our ancestors knowing that no matter who you are, at some point your ancestors had to sacrifice themselves for any of us to be here. That is particularly acutely true for me as a Black American living in the US, but it is true for all of us as human beings. So I want to actually, if I can, y'all, share with you this quote that comes from someone who I actually don't know much about. So I take no responsibility for if outside of this quote, they are messy or problematic. I'm just saying, that this quote is really powerful. And I think it speaks to what I talk with donors and investors and business leaders and those who care deeply about impact, right? Like their fatigue or disillusionment is not because they don't care. It's because they care so much, right? So it's written by someone who goes by Crow's Fault on X, formerly known as Twitter. He goes by Crow's Fault. And he says, people speak of hope as if it is this delicate, ephemeral thing made of whispers and spiders' webs. It's not. Hope has dirt on her face, blood on her knuckles, the grit of the cobblestones in her hair, and just spat out a tooth as she rises for another go. And so we talk about the kind of hope that's gritty, that's up for the fight, this is not the time to give up on faith. This is not the time to give up on hope. It's just not.
If there's one takeaway from this season of the show, it's that system change is hard. But everything that is worth doing is hard, right? To stand our ground and make sure our movements last, we need a strong coalition that is multiracial, intergenerational, and works across sectors. New Prophet is calling it the mic.
It's not like it's a new invention that New Prophet created, right? It's we all kind of just as humans in society, most of us anyway, kind of get that we need to get better and better than we currently are at building coalitions across different identities. And it's been really exciting to see in very different spaces how this idea of the mic is really resonating with people who look and live very differently from each other.
When you talk about Mike, maybe give us some examples about how it's changed the viewpoint or the orientation across the generations, across the different groups, much more diverse, much more proximate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think even though we understand when we're in sort of a consumer marketplace or when we're in the private sector context, everyone would expect me, if I was smart, to get really focused on, to spend time and money learning about my target customer base, right? They would expect me to not just, maybe read an article or two or have a focus group or two. They would expect me, if I was a smart business leader or entrepreneur, to really study the aspirations, the culture, the needs, the interests of my target customer base. I would be expected to design whatever I was offering with those aspirations and assets and cultural needs in mind. That's kind of basic. It's foundational. But in the social impact space, it's sort of like that very basic principle of being guided by the insights of those who you seek to serve or influence in some way. It kind of goes out the window. And so, we're here in a moment where it feels counterculture and, provocative to say that philanthropy should be guided by the insights, aspirations, and assets of the communities and constituencies that we say we want to support. So I would say that in philanthropy, the mic is playing out because we are building more coalitions where funders and intermediaries are, are low ego and coming together. Who would have thought, right? It's been talked about for a very long time. I'm starting to see this play out where you're seeing foundations and intermediaries that are global, partnering with organizations that are U.S. focused, the U.S. philanthropy, recognizing that we have a lot to learn from the global space, particularly the global South. We have something at New Prophet that we've co-founded with Skoll called the Center for Exponential Change, right? And we're really excited about that.
And that's, exactly what English and I had a conversation about, the donor attitude. How do you kind of thinking about real, true donor collaborative partnerships and including people who are proximate including people who they're trying to affect in the consideration and in the discussion around what we've been working on.
Yeah.
And I think it is still a cultural shift. I mean, we haven't seen it happen in every donor case. Some are waking up to it. Skoll, I think, is definitely advanced in that thought process. And I think others are still, let me get a donor collaborative come together and all us donors will get together and we'll decide where the money goes to.
Yeah.
As opposed to, more broad coalition.
To hear our episode on donors, please follow the link in the show notes. In it, English and I have a frank conversation on how donors can better support System Catalysts and make a more lasting impact.
This idea of maybe not exactly like-minded, but like-hearted.
Mm-hmm.
Can you expand on that a little bit and tell me about the narrative around New Prophet really trying to pull on that string, right? Like how does that actually play out in practice? What does that look like for your organization?
So Brianna Fruane, who is the lead of something called Pacific Climate Warriors. I had the privilege of being on a panel with her at the Skoll World Forum a few weeks back. And so she is the person who really introduced me to this concept and framework of like-hearted. She said it is more important for us to be with like-hearted people than like-minded people. And so, one of the things that highlights for me, Brianna is doing work around climate change, being guided by indigenous principles and frameworks, deeply proximate to the context. And as we know, and as I know you all have discussed in other episodes of Systems Catalyst, the irony of the climate change movement is that communities that are often disproportionately negatively impacted by the ravages of climate change are often communities of color, indigenous communities, and yet those same communities are often not at the center of architecting solutions, right? This is this pervasive challenge we've been talking about. So when we talk about what does like-hearted versus like-minded look like, what are some examples of that? I would say that at New Prophet, we're preparing to do an event called The Well, right? This year, it will be November 11th through 13th, which I'm sure you notice is the week following the presidential election in the United States, right? And as I know you all have discussed on the show, democracy in general is a topic of global concern this year in unprecedented ways. And here in the U.S., as you know better than most, right? There's a lot of big questions that are being brought to bear. So we're bringing people together the week after the election, when it's likely that we won't even have an agreed upon outcome of that election, right? It will likely still be being contested and, analyzed even a week later, right? So like-hearted versus like-minded for us at The Well means that we are purposefully bringing together people who have certainly different party affiliations for folks who buy into the two-party system. We'll have some folks who don't buy into the two-party system in the room. We'll have leadership and legislative leaders from red states and blue states and, in between and in transition states. We'll have a critical mass of young people who are critical of the whole thing, deeply active and informed profoundly by proximate insights. We'll have creatives who are using their platform and reach to influence the public discourse and the belief systems that are guiding what all of us are doing, quiet as it's kept. So we are purposefully building a space where we know that we have folks who have different tactical strategies when it comes to policy, different levels of access to economic resource, different racial and ethnic identities to be sure, different geographic backgrounds to be sure, but they have like-heartedness in that they all believe that a thriving, multiracial, inclusive democracy is in all of our interest. There are some people who do not believe in a thriving, multiracial democracy. So everybody who is coming to The Well are folks who are like-hearted and that they believe that as hard as it is, as messy as it is and will become, that it is required that we do our part to figure out what a thriving, multiracial democracy can look like in the U.S.
Well, we have talked and will continue to talk to a lot of different people. Any advice you might have for us, but also people who might be listening, what to get excited about, what areas to potentially focus, what stories we need to hear going forward that you think would be relevant?
Yeah, I would not dare to advise y'all because there's a lot that you all both know and have learned and are doing that's just really, really brilliant. So I would just offer as sort of kindred spirits on the journey together, that I have been really struck by how powerful the fear factor is. There was a show called Fear Factor at one point, so I don't know.
Yes, there was.
Yeah, there was. It was, whatever. But this is an advice. This is what you guys are already doing. It's like the systems of oppression. Like if we think about colonialism, right? Where part of the work was removing the capacity for self-determination for people, in a land that was theirs, right? And so that effort included, violence, theft, all the brutalities that we all know. But it also included some mind games about worth, and it included some psychological warfare, right? So if there was somebody who had stood against colonial power, their punishment was done in public so that you not only shut down the individual or the group, but you also created a culture of fear for that entire community, right? And so I think that, we should all, those of us who have platforms where we're lifting up stories, we shouldn't be shy about, saturating our listeners' ears with the stories and the specifics of victory. I think it really matters now. So sharing stories of victory, sharing stories of collaboration, sharing stories of possibility, all of this matters, and we shouldn't be shy about it, and we shouldn't worry that we're not being rigorous if we share stories of victory, possibility, and transformative outcomes. Like, we need that as a species.
No, I think that is beautifully said, Tulaine. And it's one of those things that I feel like I try and tell people that I love all the time. It's like, if you're going to invest so much energy in worrying, if you're going to invest so much energy into the negative and thinking about the negative and making that a possibility, you have to equally invest the energy into the positive and manifesting that to be true as well. So thank you so much, Tulaine. It's always just such a joy to talk to you.
Absolutely, English. It's so good to see your face. I don't get to see you enough, but we'll fix that. We'll fix that.
We'll remedy that.
All right, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was fun. It was fun. It's so fun to be able to have conversations with good human beings. You know what I mean?
What a great way to close season 2. If you enjoyed our conversation with Tulaine, be sure to check out her podcast, Say More with Tulaine Montgomery. You can find the link in our show notes. Plus, don't miss out next week when we'll be featuring one of her episodes right here on our feed. See you in season 3 of System Catalyst. That's it for today's show. Please don't forget to subscribe to System Catalysts so you don't miss out on a new episode. Also, do us a huge favor by rating our podcast and leaving us a review. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll catch you all in the next episode.
Before we go, I'd like to thank our producers at Human Group Media. We'd also like to thank our incredible network of partners who are supporting our mission: the Skoll Foundation, the Aspen Institute's Aspen Global Leadership Network, Echoing Green, DRK Foundation, Maverick Collective, Virgin Unite, Charlize Theron Africa Outreach Project, Boldly Go Philanthropy, Synergos, Forward Global, Nexus, and New Profit. If you're interested in becoming a System Catalyst and would like to learn more about our partners, please visit systemcatalyst.com.